Very warm welcome to all of our attendees this morning. Today we are going to be discussing noisy areas. In fact, with all the comments and questions that came through over the past week or two, when you've taken a look at what was coming up during the month of October, a lot of you mentioned the noise-induced hearing loss regulations and how this is affecting you on some of your sites. Now, yes, we do agree that there's a lot of factors that go into place where noise-induced hearing regulations come into play for you as a contractor on site, or perhaps even in your own workshops and buildings where you are perhaps doing a lot of work, perhaps in the factory where noisy machinery is being used, and you wanted to know how this affects you. So it's very difficult to put all of this information into half an hour. So let's do our best by taking a look at the noisy areas that we are working in, what legislation affects us, and how should we go about designing a policy for noise-induced hearing loss regulations to protect ourselves, our employees, as well as those who work in and around the services that we provide. So again, as Jacques mentioned, don't forget about the Man in the Van podcast. This is coming through to you on many different apps, maninthevan.co.za, Apple Podcasts, Player FM, Iono FM, Spotify, Pocket Casts, as well as on the new app Plumber. If you have any questions or queries or even comments on this, please get in touch with Iopsa or even the guys at Articulated or PRB, and they will definitely assist you with any information regarding these podcasts. So noise, what is noise? When we talk about noise in the workplace, we are specifically talking about a sound that is undesirable. So in other words, it's noise, not just because it's loud, but because it is undesirable in the way that it annoys, distracts, or interferes those hearing it, or because it has the potential to damage the hearing mechanism of those exposed to it. So the noise-induced hearing loss regulations specifically are speaking about noise that has the potential to damage the hearing mechanism. In other words, you can lose your hearing over time if you are exposed to this type of noise over an extended period of time, or because the noise is so loud that it starts rupturing or damaging those inside the ear. So what we want to essentially do now is take a look at your current tasks. So over the past week, I dropped a few of you a couple of messages, just chatting to you about the types of tools that you use and also the types of working environments that you are in. Many of you mentioned as plumbers that you do use a drill machine. Now, a lot of drill machines, we've taken a look at the readings, they are below 85 decibels. But then we started looking at some of your bigger drilling machines, some of your core drilling machines, and these are starting to go over and above the 85 decibel mark. So it all did vary, but majority of the time we noticed an increase in sound, obviously, with a lot of the tools that we are using, especially the grinding discs and the grinding tools that we are using. And this is where the higher decibel reading came from in your tasks. So if you are using a drill, a core drill, or a grinding machine, these generally are pushing the decibel level up for the tasks that you're providing. Now, there's a lot of factors, as we mentioned, that come into play, duration and exposure, and we'll chat about that in a minute. But we want to specifically say to you, have you arranged a risk assessment designed around the tools that you are using? Now, how do you know what sound or output decibel reading your tools are giving you? Well, simply put, just ask the manufacturer, because generally speaking, they will have the actual readings for that tool that you are currently using. If you cannot get a hold of the manufacturer, you can get applications on your phone that also read this. They're not as accurate as proper decibel reading meters, or perhaps you can go and get one from a specialist. If you have quite a few tools, obviously you don't want to outlay that type of money just for one tool, or perhaps you can ask somebody to assist you who has a decibel reading mechanism or a piece of equipment that can assist you with that tool. Now, what you want to achieve here is to try and find out, is it above 85 decibels? And even if it isn't, what are you doing to have best practice? So yes, we do take a look at certain factors when it comes to noise-induced hearing loss regulations, and these factors that affect the hearing loss of ourselves and our employees are the intensity of the noise. So this is the decibel reading. If it is over 85, then the Occupational Health and Safety Act, according to the regulation, states that you must put in specific hearing protective devices. So HPDs, or these devices such as ear muffs, not just your earplugs. Sometimes earplugs do not help as much as proper ear muffs. Sometimes you even have to have the noise cancelling ones, depending on the decibel reading or the intensity of the noise that you are facing. So again, we are not specifically saying that you have to have one piece of PPE or one piece of hearing protection for the drill or the grinder. This really comes down to the reading, the decibel reading, as well as your risk exposure. So your risk assessment telling you how often are you exposed to it? What is the duration of the exposure? Then the individual themselves, their susceptibility to noise, things like age, ear infection, or certain medication they're on. And this really comes down to having a medical. Now, all of you out in the industry are doing your annual medicals. Every single year, you send your staff in, they do a medical, and they normally get hearing done as well. This is an audiogram that is generally done every year. Now, depending on the type of work, the intensity of the noise, the temporal pattern, the spectral pattern, as well as the duration of exposure, you are going to start finding either that there is a decrease in hearing over a certain period of time, and then it is going to be suggested that you have more regular intervals of medical surveillance. Now, again, we're not stating this as a blanket rule so that every single one of you have to have more medicals done throughout the year. Again, it comes down to your risk management system. If you are noticing that noise is a very, very large part of what you're doing, not just a few minutes or few hours every week of drilling and grinding, but it's actually a high percentage of your tasks, then you're going to need to try and identify what additional measures need to be put in place, not only according to regulations, but according to your own best practice of protecting your employees' hearing. As then we also have to take a look at the individual themselves. When last have we really read through the medical that was given to us once our guys had gone in? Remember, although this is confidential information and we are not going to share this with any other person or any other employee, the employee and the employer have a right to this information in order to protect that employee from any future issues. So as an employee, when you got your medical, did you take a look through it? Did you have a chat to the doctor who performed that medical? Perhaps they gave you a few suggestions. Maybe they said something was not right with your hearing. Did you take note of that? Did you speak to your employer to discuss maybe further measures to put in place? Remember, you might be wearing earplugs at the moment for the type of tool that you are using, but the doctor may have suggested some additional measures for you, or perhaps better protective measures due to the nature of your medical. So discuss this with your employer openly. Remember, this is all in the interest of your health and safety in the future. Noise-induced hearing loss generally happens over a period of time. So initially, when you're using that grinder or that piece of equipment that's pretty loud, sometimes even these high pressure spraying machines, I know many of you are using them to clean out the drains, and I've seen some pretty massive machines out there. A lot of times it's protected and insulated in the back of a van, but sometimes it is open and you are exposed to that because you need to get in, switch it on, clean it out, or be in the vicinity of this machine for a prolonged period of time to check that it is actually functioning. And it's at these times that you are susceptible to long-term hearing loss. In other words, over a period of time, it starts deteriorating, and you might not see that within the first few days or weeks or months. This is going to happen gradually, maybe over a few years. And don't just think, well, I'm getting older, I'm losing my hearing. There may be something that you are doing specifically within your tasks, in your occupation, that is affecting your hearing. And then you could have total hearing loss in the future because we didn't protect ourselves now. So we've seen it. We drive down the traffic lanes and we hear blaring music out of a vehicle. This is obviously above 85 decibels. The next day, you can still hear fine. But again, this is a long-term process. Over a long period of time, we start damaging those internal mechanisms inside the ear, as you can see here. And once these are ruptured, they can never be repaired. So please remember, once you start losing your hearing, there is no medical procedure to put that back in place for you. Yes, they can assist you with some sort of surgeries, but these are not always effective. So losing your hearing is an extremely dangerous thing, especially in the industry that we're working in with the noisy tools, such as grinders, your heavy drill machines, and sometimes even the machinery that you are currently using. So what are we essentially saying according to the law? Well, as we mentioned, your noise-induced hearing loss regulations were promulgated under your Occupational Health and Safety Act, and this requires the employer to implement. This is all employees. So regardless of what industry you're in, if you are exposed to noise, then you have to put in your control procedures. You have to ensure that the hearing of your employees are protected. And this is especially when the noise rating is above 75 decibels. The compensation for occupational injuries and disease, this is your COID Act, also says that noise-induced hearing loss, or the percentage of lost hearing, your PLH, is only allowed to be compensated from 10% and above. So if you start losing your hearing and it's less than 10%, they generally don't do any compensation for that. But once you've lost your hearing to the point of about 10%, according to Schedule 3, then you start being able to claim from compensation. Now, you might say to yourself, well, that's good. I can at least claim from compensation, because I'm losing my hearing. But what would you rather have? Money or your hearing? We might say to ourselves right now, well, COVID, everything happening, money sounds like a very good thing, but losing your hearing is something you can never get back again. So please be careful with the types of tasks you are doing. And remember, you need to plan for the task. You need to have a risk assessment done in order to determine what is the correct PPE to be using for that task. When we say in general, mandatory PPE hearing protection, what are we actually saying? Well, according to that task, what is the decibel reading and how do we get it to a low and acceptable risk for that employee? Then the Circulation Instruction 171 provides further guidance on compensation for employees. So that is the handout that you've received. You can go ahead and take a look at the compensation, or the COID Act, that was promulgated in 1993. That's obviously already available online, but the Circulation Instruction 171 is there as an additional measure for hearing loss. So if you are battling with this type of information, or you need to know more information, please just drag and drop that handout. If you haven't or aren't able to get that handout off the actual system, it is also on the Toolbox Talk Dropbox section. If you don't have access to that Dropbox, or perhaps you cannot access the Dropbox at all, then just drop us an email and we'll send you this in PDF copy as well. So noise-induced hearing loss regulations basically states that there are certain measures that this is mandatory, must be put in place to protect the hearing and long-term exposure of our employees. Now, cumulative or permanent loss of hearing that develops gradually after months or years of exposure to high-level noises. And this is essentially what we are trying to prevent. Remember, this is gradual. It happens over months or years of exposure. So again, you are not going to see this affecting you right away. It's going to take time. And normally when it's gradual, it's something that we often do not give attention to. So gradually, many of us, perhaps you start realizing we're putting on a little bit of weight because of being in confinement because of COVID-19, and gradually you start realizing you need to exercise more and more. But is it from one day to the next that you've noticed it, or is it gradually over a period of time? Well, you'll obviously notice that it's sometimes months or even years that you realize you need to start making a change. Fortunately, with weight, that can change. When it comes to hearing loss, once you've lost it, it cannot be regained. So you cannot lose 10% of your hearing and then gain it back again. Once it's lost, it is lost. So please remember, this type of danger exists every single day with you as plumbers. You're constantly using these types of tools in your industry. It is also the most common compensation claim globally. So throughout the entire year, this is the mostly claimed compensation around the earth, because noise-induced hearing loss happens over a period of time. But it is also one of the most major avoidable causes of permanent hearing impairment. In other words, it is avoidable. We can do something now to stop it from becoming such a huge issue in the future. But we do need to do something. We can't just sit back and allow others to take the responsibility for us. So the World Health Organization basically stated that around the globe, 0.2 to 2% of the GDP of developing nations was used in occupational noise-induced hearing loss claims. I mean, that is a staggering amount if you think of the billions that is spent every month and what it is to have your GDP for a developing nation, let's say such as Europe or even ourselves here in Africa. 2% of that goes to paying out for noise-induced hearing loss. This is an amazing amount of money that is spent every single year in claims that could be avoidable if we had the right protection. So what are we actually saying for you as plumbers? A lot of the questions came out from you about what should I be doing to protect my employees' hearing for noise-induced hearing loss. What should I be doing when my clients and the safety officer of my clients state that I must have noise-induced hearing loss regulations applied to my scope of work? Some of you have not used this regulation before. You're still using your current tools and it is noisy, but you don't fall under this specific requirement, but perhaps it's starting to become more and more of a requirement on your sites. So what should you do? Well, every single company should have a policy. So what are you going to do? What is your goal as a company to protect your staff against noise-induced hearing loss in future? And then you need to outline certain steps. And one of the steps that you're going to take is the development of an SOP, a standard operating procedure. As a company, there must be a standard procedure that you are going to apply to any noisy environment. So any environment that is 85 decibels or higher. So what should this include? Well, it is the responsibilities of all persons involved, from management, your employer, right down to your employee. And this is your health and safety teams. You can even collaborate with occupational hygienists. You can contract out AIAs. This is an approved inspection authority. These are guys that actually come out to your premises. They then do a extremely in-depth investigation into every single tool or environment that you are in, and then they do noise testing and they give you feedback and they tell you this is your exposure level and this is what you should be doing as a recommendation, and this can then be taken and put into your risk assessment.